Okay, and we're back, and now we get to talk about the second game, which is from one of my favorite companies, Mistwalker. And if you haven't already listened to it, we did an entire episode devoted to Mistwalker. I definitely advise you to check it out because it was a great episode. And at the ending of the episode, we were talking about the preview for the last story. Now we get to talk about the game in its entirety and our thoughts and feelings, how it touched us in many ways, hopefully not inappropriately, but anyway, yeah. Yes, one thing I just want to talk about, I've already touched upon this, was the wait for the last story was a big one, because the impact that Lost Odyssey had on me, it made me into a Mistwalker fanboy of sorts. And I remember basically patrolling the internet whenever the last story was mentioned. And I remember being there on Ustream for the 2-hour epic conference that the guys had on the game. And I remember being spellbound and like, oh, this is the number one game I want to play. And I remember when the free Rainfall games was, announced to production, the last story was the number one that I was looking forward to the most. And in some ways, it met my expectations, but in some ways it didn't as well. And I want to talk about that at great length. Now, again, this is one of the games that good sir over here got to play before any of us, and I got to see that at the live stream. And I pretty much said to myself, I only watched the first 8 hours of the game before I call it quits, which ironically is kind of a good quarter of the game. So, but yeah, I'll pass it over to Taylor. What was your thoughts and feelings leading up to the last story's release and that initial playthrough? Because that was one of your longest streams, that I ever witnessed.
Yeah, that stream was kind of tiresome because I was doing double duty of not only like playing it, but kind of trying to give you guys a play-by-play of what's going on.
Yeah, we kind of demanded. It's like, what did they say? What did they say?
Yeah, because if you're just watching, you're just like, okay, I have no idea what's going on if you don't understand Japanese. So I'm trying to I'm trying to play the game, catch what's being said, look at what you guys are saying in the stream or like the chat box, and then respond to it. And yeah, that was a lot of effort.
We demanded more. This is a good looking game. But yeah, it was when we got the game. When I got the game, it felt like a whole weight was lifted off my shoulders, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. But there is a few problems I want to address. But before we go into it, Era, what was your first feelings? I think we've already discussed this on the Mistwalker episode, but just to remind everyone.
Well, from the point of the Mistwalker episode, leading up to the actual release of the game at the end of February this year, I was hyped up. I finished Xenoblade Chronicles in December, early January, and I was hyped. I was kind of hoping, Mistwalker, with their great track record of Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, I was hoping, well, this could potentially, be even better than Xenoblade Chronicles. So I was really hyped up for it, together with, of course, a new Final Fantasy 13-2, and the last story, and also Metal Gear Solid HD. I thought, fantastic franchises that I love so much are getting new sequels, and I was really, really hyped up for the last story. So I couldn't wait to get my hands on, and once I finally did, I just had to pop it in and start playing it.
Yeah, I was. Do you know there was this one point that I was really unsure if it was coming out. Now, I want to plug this shameless tale of meeting a celebrity, because if you haven't already know, and I know everyone sort of knows, I actually met Nobuo Uematsu, and I got to shake his hand, thank him for the wonderful music, and then popped in saying, I can't wait to play the last story. And he said to me, I don't think the game's coming out. And that kind of was like, oh, we'll make sure we'll get it. He kind of chuckled at that. But I'm hoping that when he heard the news that the game was going to get released worldwide, that put a smile on his face. We will talk about his music at the later stage, because it's interesting to say the least, I'll say. But Yes. Give me a brief story of the world of the last story. Is you play as a mercenary named Zale. If you're playing a Japanese, his name is Elza, and we'll get into the localization problems later on. But you're with his band of merry mercenaries, and they're on their way to do a job, and shit gets serious, and one thing leads to another, and Zale acquires the power of the gathering. And I won't go too much into how or what it is, you'll have to experience that for yourself, but he has the power to do many to gather monsters, and it works in the story, but it also works in battle, where I'll probably touch upon that right now. Is the battle system in the last story is very interesting, because the way to describe it, and I described it in the Mistwalker episode, is it's a strategic action RPG. And you're thinking, how does that work? Well, basically, sometimes the game gives you the option of planning a strategy before the battle, where you have to enter a certain point, so you're not alerting the enemies. Yes, I'll be using a lot of sort of terms that kind of harken back to Metal Gear Solid and all that, because there was times I kind of felt like I was playing a medieval Metal Gear Solid game, because stealth also plays a big part in this game, where you can actually put your back to the wall and you'll actually sort of, what's that word? Strafe in the walls or something, or cover them, whatever. And you can even peer at the wall. It kind of felt like a Metal Gear game in certain parts, but the game awards you if you get the jump on the enemies with, like, double, triple damage and critical hits, and it's really good. You can plan so much, and that's one thing I really like from the last story. In the game, attacking is automatic. You just simply have to go up to the enemy and the character will attack. However, you do have to press certain buttons to use certain abilities. And I can tell you this now, I had trouble to begin with. And usually, we're talking about how at the beginning of Xenoblade there was a lot of problems with that, but I kind of expected it, and I was like, well, that's due to the controls. With the last story, it's kind of due to the gameplay with the battlefield and changing of the enemies, because one of the skills is the slash ability, where you basically have to go up to a wall and you peer, and when an enemy comes into a certain range, it will have a little slash across the top of its, just above the enemy. And if it's glowing orange and you press the button, Zale will just come out and just slash and do buttloads of damage. However, it was so intricate that the slightest, movement of the enemy might be off it, and if you press the button when it's not there, you basically just walk out with your hand in your pants, waiting for the enemies come and get the drop on you. And I was just like, wow, you just got to be patient with this game, because if you do stuff too quickly, you may pay for it with your life. So, one thing I just want to talk about quickly, the battle system, is the spell system. As I mentioned before in the previous episode, it takes a lot to cast, and later on you do get the ability to speed it up. But if an enemy comes over and hits them, it cancels it out, and this was really annoying. But it also added to the challenge, so you had to be on your toes, especially in those battles where just, a horde of enemies would just wash the field, and you would literally have to stand next to the magic user to make sure he or she wouldn't get hit. So, yeah, I could definitely say the last story was a very challenging action RPG. And the one thing I will say that it throws you a bone with is if your character learns new skills, it actually gives you a tutorial each time you learn the skills on how to use them. And for the most part it works, but for the vertical blade, I was like, what? Or what is going on? It wasn't until later in the game I finally got the handle on it. You have to press really, really hard at the wall, and your character walks up the wall and jumps down and strikes. And if you can perfect this, it makes the game just, I wouldn't say easier outright, but it just gives you another card to use in your arsenal. So, yeah, just quickly I'll go to everyone else. What do you think of the battle system?
All right, let's see here. Yeah, the last story, it starts off really interesting with its battle system. I have to be honest and say that I was really surprised, by the implementation of stealth and stuff like that. And the different characters, with the magic users having to spellcast, you got to defend them and stuff like that. And I have to be honest, I never really had issues with the with the controls. and I just used the slash attacks a lot, with Zale. But one thing that really, at some point, honestly started to frustrate me with this game was the fact that it was way too easy, at least for me. Basically, how the game works is you go through an area, and there's a set number of encounters and battle pieces, and the way to kind of remedy this, to have more battles, is they have these spawn points where you can basically have another battle. You basically go up to this circle and you fight another battle. And perhaps this was my own mistake, but especially in the opening 10 hours or so, whenever I encountered a circle, I basically used that 2 or 3 more times. So I guess I was kind of over leveled at some point.
It does get to the point where there is a cap for that area, because monsters don't give you anything after you spam that like crazy for a while. So in a sense that was good. That means it didn't give you the sense that you had to be there forever. That if you just gave it enough time, you could max out your characters for that certain chapter. Yeah, but I can totally understand where you're going. Everything's so coordinated in the last story. You have to do this here, you have to do this here. One thing I just want to quickly interject with is I forgot to mention, and it's actually my favorite part of the game. However, I know this is going to annoy some people, is most of the strategy in this game actually comes from your weapons. And I love the weapon system in this game. If there's one thing I can go out of the game is I I love changing weapons. And I was about to say on the fly, but that's actually bullshit. You actually don't change weapons on the fly. You have to go into the menu and change them, which can get annoying. But ultimately, if you do it, it makes the game easier, because when a weapon says that it's good against the undead, you better believe it's good against the undead. It just makes the game so... I remember one that was good against the undead or bone creatures, whatever, and I was just slaughtering them without batting an eyelid. I was like, oh my god, that's awesome. So you just basically, throughout the entire game, I basically spend most of my time like, getting weapons, upgrading weapons, optimizing them so I can go into any situation and just annihilate everything in my path. And it was so much fun. I don't know how you guys felt about this. I should ask Taylor, what do you think about the whole battle system as a whole?
I like the battle system. I didn't have any issues with like the vertical slash. I actually like that. I did on time have the very, very unfortunate mishap of, instead of slashing out at the monsters, I kind of just ran out from the wall I was hiding behind, and yeah, that wasn't pretty, because I think it's like the first time they introduced that mechanic or something in the sewer.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, you got this new ability. Why don't you try using it? And I used it straight into the enemy's sword with my face, kind of thing. So, it was
hey, look at me!
Yeah. Hey, look at this new skill. I totally did. Oh, fuck. Yeah, I liked it. The magic and stuff was nice. How do I want to put this? It wasn't... The last story wasn't something that those little parts where you had the strat bit, I liked them, but there wasn't enough of them. Well, I guess there wasn't enough of them for me. And they weren't that big of a deal to me. They were nice, a nice little change of pace, but the sneaking thing too, you'd have it here and there, but it didn't feel like it was maybe used enough or something, or maybe at least
in different areas, one from the other, because most of the big expansive battlefields is where you use your strategy if you're undercover, and then for the more narrower areas, you'd be sneaking, right, in a way. Don't want to spoil 2 areas, but we're in my head. You probably know which areas I'm referring to. So, but
yeah. So. That's just it was. I have to agree with Era. The battles themselves were pretty easy. The game itself isn't very difficult, I would say. So
the thing with that is you at some point you get more characters in your party than you want to. Like Xenoblade, it has a set characters, 3 characters in your party, but at some point in the game, you get guest characters as well. You already have 4 or 5 characters, and then you have the guest characters. and then you're just battling it out with like 6 characters in your party at some point, and each character has pretty much 5 lives, which is just way too ridiculous. And I was looking at it in the menus to turn up the difficulty, but honestly, this ruined the game. At least somewhat ruined the game for me, especially when I got past the 10-hour part. I stopped using stealth and everything, and I just wanted to finish it because this was the end of February and a lot of RPGs and games were coming out. So at some point I was just like, I was just going into battle, just rushed in there, didn't think about strategy, and then with all my party, I just started slashing everything together, and maybe lose 2 or 3 lives on each character. And I remember some boss battles where I was just like on the last life for 1 or 2 characters, and fought very conservatively, but the difficulty in terms of battles was pretty much non-existent, and especially if you kept up with using the encounter circle, as well as upgrading your weapons and using the materials that you gained from the battles. The battle was just, it started off really interesting, but there was not a lot of variety and just too much similar type of battles. Perhaps I abused the system the wrong way, but it kind of felt boring at some point. But yeah, it's still a very interesting gameplay system on its own, but just it was missing the depth that, say, a Xenoblade Chronicles has later on in the game.
Well, one thing I forgot to mention that I kind of enjoyed, it kind of took away, at the same time it was kind of annoying, but I kind of really enjoyed it, is the game gives you a crossbow, and you actually shoot enemies from afar. And actually, so for some battles, it was actually quite fun. Later on, this one battle's just crazy. There's so many enemies that's on the field as there are up in the battlements, and you're just like, do I target the enemies on the ground or on there? And you will find out quickly that you're the only one that can target those enemies on the battlements, because they will actually cause the most damage in some cases. And I actually found it satisfying shooting those enemies. And there's also another part of the game that's felt very satisfying, and I think Taylor will testify to this. We'll talk about that in a bit, but I actually kind of like the crossbow system. And when we talk about the town, I want to talk about something I thought was really cool for upgrading your arrow abilities. But okay, from one thing we covered in the combat, of course, you've got your normal ground combat, you've got your stealth, you've got your strategizing, where you attack the enemy to get the jump on them, and you've got your archery. So I honestly really didn't have a problem. I can understand where Arrow's going from, that it does get very repetitive, and that's really up to you if you want to spend some time to gain some levels, or you just want to plow through the story. Because we're going to talk about the last story in a bit, is the thing that really jumped about me, the story, and I think you can testify to this, is this is one of the RPGs that it felt like I was reading a book in terms of its pacing. Now, when people think of that, they think of something like Valkyria Chronicles, because that actually has a book where you navigate through the story and the missions. Now, you don't have a book that navigates, but it feels like a book. Because then you got the narrator. There's heavy narration in the last story, and the length of some of the chapters it feels like you're reading a book, because within a minute you're in the next chapter without even realizing it. Not always the case. There's sometimes where there'll be chapters where you need to actually do them yourselves, where it's a side quest. Like, there'll be one part of the game where you'll be like, oh, don't quote me on specific numbers, just basically throwing it out there, like, be chapter 21, and if you go straight to the story, you'll be chapter 24, and you're like, hey, what the hell happened to the other chapters? Is you actually have to go and find them within the town. And I want to talk about that right now, is the island of Lazarus has this one town. Now, I have to bring this out there, that if you're not a fan of one town hub games, then I'm sorry to tell you, that's what Last Story is one town. And I usually don't have a problem with that, because I don't mind Lazarus Island. It's pretty cool. One thing I really want to talk about in terms of the island is one thing I really like is there's a system in the game that makes it's a different type of grinding that's never been done in an RPG. There is this ability where you can seek out things on the ground or wherever. And it's actually a time little game where, depending on how fast you look at this stuff, it actually gives you items. And you have to look at the 5 times in the row, and that 5th one is lightning quick. But if you can see it, it actually rewards you with some stat increasing items. And when I talk about, I mean permanent stats like +1 strength or +1, this or more health, and it's crazy. I could just foresee people that are completionists being there for days on end, just staring at random stuff, Because if you want to know, it's not random stuff. There'll actually be like a little thing on the screen you actually have to aim your target at, and you'll do that. Now, one part of the town that I really love is there's this windy street, and you actually have to aim looking at the wind blows. And if you actually hit it, it actually increases your archery skill, which I thought was actually quite clever of Sakaguchi to do that, because realistically, yeah, you're looking at a part of the wind and aiming with your eyes, and I'm like, that's pretty awesome. But yeah, I'll actually give it to Taylor and Arrow what they thought of it, because I know Taylor has a very funny story, because I watched him do this on the stream many times with great laughter everywhere.
What Greg is alluding to is that you can actually purchase an upgrade for your little crossbow gun, and it is a banana peel. And you're probably going, what in the hell is this? Why is this so funny? It's funny, and it's awesome, because you can shoot this banana peel at people, and they will fall. And that's seriously all it is. And
they fall on their ass.
They fall. Yeah, they fall on their tukish, and it's hilarious. Not only that, but they have barrels, which it actually plays in a part of the story where there's these barrels of like lemons. I think they're lemons, and you throw them onto the streets, and people will walk on them and slip on them, and you can walk on them and slip on them too. Most hilarious. I could play that game for hours and just do that. Like that there in itself.
And people thinking, what the fuck? But you had to be on the stream, and you had to witness the good sir's devilry, because he kind of made it. It was great, but he made it more funny than it was. just putting it out there.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was hysterical, and well, I think I have no idea. I guess I am just really simple-minded. But the great thing, the great thing about it is you could throw the lemons onto the ground, and like one of the first little cutscenes is when you see Quark, as I think that's his name, and I know we'll get into that later. But you meet up with him, and in the background, the townspeople will be slipping all these lemons, and you're trying to have this serious conversation, and you can't do it. I'm watching. It's so fun. I can't do it without laughing. It's so funny to see them trying to get serious and talk, and in the background, people are busting their ass off with lemons.
And you know what's even more funny? You actually get rewarded later in the game for doing this. So yeah, if you're like, oh, what a dumbass, well, being a dumbass pays off. So yeah, you'll find that out for yourself. Yeah, the town itself is really good, because in one way, this is the thing about the last story that might turn a lot of people off. I didn't have a problem. The Xenoblade is a very colorful game in terms of its areas and just the color palette presented each areas. The last story is kind of the opposite. It's very dark, lots of grays, lots of brownish and blackish.
It's very drab.
It's very drab and dry, but that's the world of the last story. It represents it really well. One thing I also want to get into because we didn't really talk too much about the characters of Xenoblade. But I actually personally want to talk about the characters of the last story. But before that, Arrow, I'm going ahead of you. What did you think of the town?
Yeah, the thing is, the town was very impressive for sure. It was very nice, hub kind of system with a lot of What I like most about it were those little alleys and little streets, and you could just really get lost and find treasure, all around, certain corners and stuff. And I really enjoyed the town on its own. But compared to the rest of the game, yeah, I think we'll get to that later on in this discussion. But the town was nice and all, but I just kind of wanted something else besides the town and the dungeons. But yeah, I was kind of missing that aspect in the last story.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit because yeah, it's a touch and go subject with that. But
Yeah.
one thing I entirely agree with you is exploring paid off big time. There'd be chests everywhere. There'd be those seek items. You could literally just grind your characters by exploring, and I cannot say I've played another game like that. It was very fulfilling, and it's that one part of the game where you can get carried away, and if you do too much of it, it may put you off playing it. So use it sparingly. But I just want to talk about the characters very quickly. The main character, Zale or Elza. We'll talk about this now, and that's hand in hand with the localization. And I gotta say, what was Nintendo of Europe thinking? Unlike Xenoblade, where they kept to the original character names mostly, which was really good, in the last story they completely changed them. And I must admit, it got really annoying when I opened the game and like, what's going on? Because I can tell you this now, when I finished the last story and talked to Taylor about this, it got very confusing. It's like, who are you talking about? Who this? And I was like, the same. It was just, I have no idea why they changed their names. I mean, I'm like, you've already said this, good sir. Elza sounds like a girl's name, and I can sort of understand that. And Quark is quite a weird name because his name is Dagrin in the English version. But yeah, but the one character that kind of kept the same was Seren, and I want to talk about Seren at great length because she is awesome. She is my favorite character of the game. But yeah, it's so bizarre. I don't know why they did this. I'm guessing I don't know, went out on a limb and wanted to make it their own in a memorable way, and all that other stuff I mentioned before. But it was so unnecessarily. I just wanted to say that.
Well, like here's like the comparison. So you have Zale is the main character. His name in Japanese is Elza,
Yeah.
and then you have for Kanon, the main chick. Her name is Greg.
Callista.
Right. And so then you have Quark, who is
Dagrin.
and then you have Seiden, who is
Seren.
okay, and then you have Eudes, who is
I think that's
Do you know who-
Yurik, yeah.
yeah,
It's
okay, and then you have Jackal, who is. Do you know who Jackal is?
Is that Lowell? I think
Yes,
it is.
it is.
He's the trickster. He's like the one that pushes Seren's buttons. And then
Right,
you've
right,
got Mirani. I think it was Mia Mana or something in
It's
Japanese.
Mana Mia.
Mana Mia. When the first time the first time I listened, I thought you were saying Mamma Mia, and I'm like, what? Here we go again.
Yeah. And then wait, what was General Trista? What was his name in English? Because it's
Astral.
different too. Yeah, and then you've got Tasha, who's
Tiberia? I can't remember his name, but
Is
it's
it
something
like-
like that.
Therius or something.
Tiberius or something like that. He
Ah,
was.
okay.
I don't know. He was actually one of my favorite characters. And of course, you had Lord Argonin. Grr.
Well, which
So
is like the
Count
same.
Argonin. Yeah, Count
Yeah, which-
Argonin. I actually want to
That's
talk
the
about
same.
him. Yeah.
And
But-
who? What? And the main one was Jiru. Who? What was his name? It was
Jiral.
like Jiral. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah!
Yeah,
Such a
they
pain in the
completely. They just completely changed it and just threw everyone off. And we're trying to talk about it across the pond, but yeah. Just talking about the characters. Zale. How can I describe him? He is a silent protagonist that speaks. That's the best way to describe him. In a way, he's very basic. He's a character. It kind of works as well because you can put yourself into him slightly as the main character. Depending on RPG to RPG, it works good or bad, but it is alright, but his dialogue was really stale. Daggerin is the leader of the ragtags. He's pretty much... He comes in apparent at the beginning of the game. He has big aspirations for his group, and he wants to move up in the world. Then you have Seren. And I can spend the entire podcast talking about her, and I know that sounds perverted, but she's a really fun character. I liked her voice actress, the Cockney actress. She doesn't take herself seriously. She is one hell of a tomboy. Yes, if anyone's already seen, it's like, is she the one who dresses skimpily? Yes, she is. But one of the reasons I love her is the one thing, her biggest goal in life, more than everything, is she loves to drink. I've never encountered a character in RPG that just worships, is obsessed with grog. And it's so funny going to the tavern in some ways and just hearing some of her conversations. Oh, it's just so legendary. And there's this one part where one part of the town is the Colosseum. And she introduced you to the Colosseum. And the innuendo she gives you, I was on my ass laughing. It was just so goddamn funny. And just like that, for there on out, I pretty much labeled her as like the major comic relief element that the last story needed and delivered. And I think that was one of the main reasons I kept playing the game, is I wanted to hear one more liners from her. And it was just fantastic. Next we have Yurik, and Yurik was a good character. He's the most serious of the bunch, and ironically, he's actually the youngest of the bunch. And I can tell you this now, he's the youngest of the group, but if you look at him, he looks like he's had the most hardship because he only has one friggin' eye. He actually has an eye patch, and he's the mage of the group. And I really liked his story. He has a side quest, a side story, that really sheds light on who he is, and I really liked that. And it kind of put him up on... In my rating of the characters. And yeah, he was awesome. The other character, of course, is Mirania, who's the priestess of the group. She's a weird character. She's one of those introverted, isolated characters. And she's very quiet, but she has her own comic relief in the fact that she's one of those skinny women who likes to eat a lot. And the game kind of throws that at you, you know. That was also something that was kind of funny in its own little right, you know. Lastly, you got Lowell, and he's also hilarious because he's the youngest of the group. He's a joker of sorts, you know. He likes to push Seren's buttons, and he's kind of been made out to being a womanizer, but there's more to him than that. And okay, the biggest problem I see on forums and everything is people keep saying that they look very basic. If you give them time, they grow on you. And the cast of the last story grew on me, as did the villains. And there's a lot of great villains in the last story. And one of the things about the game that I loved more than anything is, okay, there's lots of RPGs I've played in the past where it shows nobility's true colors, but the last story does it so well. You fucking hate them. You really, really do. You really don't like the nobility of Lazarus Island, you know. And to do this, you have to really listen in on conversations, and you'd be hearing nobles scheming and all this, and trying to plan what is right, and you're just like, oh man, you know. It also adds to the atmosphere of the game, and that was another reason why I propelled, because I wanted this character to get what's coming, and this character to happen, you know. It propelled me to play the game. So, yeah, just wanted to brief that. I don't want to go too much on the story because I don't want to spoil it. Yes, there is the whole nobility aspect. There's, of course, the life of the mercenaries. And, of course, later on there's a race war with another sort of cat-like race of people that goes into it. And all this jumbles up into this, you know, the tale of the last story. So I want to give it over before I babble on to Arrow and Taylor to talk about it some more.
Oh yeah, definitely. Story-wise and character-wise, the game is really nice. I have to be honest and say, you know, the thing that I wanted to mention beforehand is that the game is pretty short. You know,
Yes.
The game took me about 25 to 28 hours to finish, and a lot of the character development is pretty impressive in the amount of time that they have. They pull off a lot of great character development, especially around the chapter 14 and 15 part where you have the mission of Yurik and stuff like that. There's a lot of character development there, but um, afterwards, around chapter 25 and stuff, it's kind of the war starting, and it's missing that epic journey sense that I had with previous Mistwalker games, and I yeah, I kind of got disappointed with that, and I just hung in there, and over a weekend I'd finished the game, and yeah, somehow the characters were somehow the last story, it was definitely not a bad game, but it was just so disappointing to see this world and this wonderful world just end so briefly. And I just wanted to see more character development. I just wanted to see more banter between this great cast of characters. And I was kind of missing that sense of journey that you undergo with a lot of RPGs. Where you're sharing a common goal to beat the bad guys and go to one location to the next, and that was kind of not really present. And somehow the caves and dungeons at some point were kind of disappointing, but once again it started off great, but it ended way too short, and that's kind of my gripe with the last story. And that's the same can be said about the story and the characters. I just felt disappointed that it ended so soon.
Okay, Taylor.
It's kind of interesting that you say that, Arrow, because what's the word? I honestly, the first 2/3 of the game, I felt kind of like I was being pushed along. Instead of enjoying it for some reason, it wasn't really capturing me. I was doing it, I was playing it, but because I just bought the game and I'm like, I want to play this, not more so, oh, I want to play it because I'm liking the game. But at that point where it gets going and gets to the war and stuff, I actually got more and more invested into it. And I know that this, like, I had read up on how Hironobu Sakaguchi kind of wanted to go about this game. He wanted to be a little bit different because Lost Odyssey may have been liked by a lot of people, but also kind of got panned by a lot of people for various other reasons. And how games are nowadays, that they don't. It seems like most people don't want that epic long journey. They want something, excuse me, that's a little bit more bite sized, and. Yeah. Which is unfortunate, because I'm kind of with you on that. I like that giant, expansive journey. I mean, freaking God, I'm playing, like, Legend of Heroes games that are taking me 60, 80 hours to do. So, I feel you on that, it is extremely unfortunate that this game wasn't longer. Because I think it would have been great had it been treated with the same kind of approach that Lost Odyssey got, and it doesn't get that. But I actually really liked how it was presented. I like that it gives you this window, but you don't necessarily have the whole view, I guess, is what I want to go for. I mean, you don't have that expansive journey all over the place and stuff, and for some reason it works. It works for me, at least. So it's
a sense of a tale told in an expansive world, and it's a mystery because I don't want to tell you about the rest of the world.
Right, and that's where the narration comes in, and it gives you this vibe. As Greg had said before, it feels like you're reading a book. When I was thinking about it, to me, it feels like it's presented as a game, but with the progression of a movie. In a way, or in a book of how they present the story, and so it's kind of it felt to me kind of like that kind of blend, and to do that, it just really, I don't know, I really, really, really enjoyed it, and the narration kind of added this mystique to it, that somebody's telling you the story, so they don't have all of the details, they don't have everything about it, so this is what you're going to get. So So,
Yeah. I'm pretty much. I have agree. It's a good world, but I'm also with you, and I'm with Arrow. With it, just would have been better if they just inserted a little bit more, just not too much, but a little bit more, just to flush it out. Now, one thing Arrow mentioned briefly is the banter between the characters. This is one of my favorite parts in the game. But it's also one of my ultimate gripes, and I'm going to talk about my gripes with the last story. Now, in real time, as you're in the dungeons and you're moving around the dungeons, out of nowhere, the characters will start talking. And it's awesome. You want to listen to this. This is where the problem lies. You will end up in an area where you'll get into a battle or you'll get into a cutscene. You know what happens to that good little conversation? It's gone.
Yes.
It will stop midway, and you've lost it. So this is my advice: if they start bantering, stop. Just stop what you're doing, put down the control, and listen. Because there'd be like a really good story piece between characters, or if Seren's talking, hilarity will ensue. So definitely just basically put down your controls. But still didn't like that Mistwalker did that. I wish they had like a warning button saying, hey, go upon this point, you'll lose this. But it doesn't do it. So one of the things I have to bring up, and this is actually not the game's fault, but more with the European version, is one thing that will turn off a lot of people is if you're just playing a Wii on a standard definition TV with just normal AV cables. Well, I'm sorry to say that this game only runs at 60 frames per second. And I remember putting this on my normal TV, and the game will actually not play. It will stop and tell you to play it on a HD TV, which just floored me. It was like, you mean to say that you have to play it on a HD TV? It was just so surprising. It's kind of sad in a way as well that you're forced to buy a HD. I mean, nowadays it pays to have a HD TV, but at the same time, it's sad if you don't have the money for one, that you have a game here that will only run on one. It was kind of sad in a way, But that was another little gripe, but leading into the quality of the game. Now, for the most part, 50% of the game looks good, but there are so many times when the game lags. And it lags when you're trying to turn the camera, and it gets jarring and, jaggy and all this, and it doesn't look good at all. The character models and the terrain and everything looks great, but I think it's the fact that they program so much on the screen. Now, with the town, there's so many townsfolk. And I've noticed at times there'll be townsfolk that actually slow down. Their animation will just lag and draw. It's because, I don't know, probably because they program so much that the Wii can't handle it. Now, I don't know if this is a problem in the Japanese version or not. I think Taylor will have to comment on this.
oh yeah, it doesn't. It's not. I didn't notice it as much, and it did pop up. There were times where it would slow down and stuff, but no, I didn't really notice the townspeople going into bullet time, if you will, and that sort of thing. So.
I'm not crazy, and my Arrow backed me up.
Yeah, there are definitely some times where there's just insane slowdown, which is very disappointing. I probably think that's due to the amount of characters on screen, but yeah, I noticed it at some times, and that's kind of disappointing to see. But we'll get to another aspect later on, which I felt they, contributed too much time to. But we'll talk about it later on.
Yes, but ultimately, I don't know what Xseed's going to do for the American version. If they look into it, great. But usually, Xseed likes to cut costs. I can totally understand that. So, if you can look past it, then it shouldn't be a problem. But I'm just pulling it out there that it's noticeable, and I don't know. Usually, stuff like that in games, I don't give a second thought about if it only happens once or twice. But it happens so many times with the last story. But I kind of push it to the side and just continue on with the game. But yeah, I'm actually kind of running out of things to talk about it, honestly. Actually, no, there is one thing I want to briefly talk about, because it'd be a travesty not to, and Nobuo Uematsu, I mean, come on. I remember when I bought the game, my sister came over, and she's a huge fan of Nobuo Uematsu, even though she doesn't play Final Fantasy. And she took it's like, oh, what's this game? And it's like, oh, it's The Last Story. Oh, and I remember she looked at it, and then she came into the room saying, I know why he bought it, and she pointed to the fact it had music by Nobuo Uematsu on there, which I thought was quite hilarious. It's like, I didn't buy it just for him. Mostly, because I'm a big fan of his music, dear listeners, and I have to say this: The Last Story's music is strange. It's good, but there's just some parts of the game where you're just like, huh, interesting. Especially the final boss theme, which is just, it's insane. The dude is insane. It really is. It's totally. It's not his style. It's when you're using screams to make a final boss battle. Yeah, interesting. But for the most part, like the theme of The Last Story and the opening screen, oh, it's fantastic. It's just so spellbinding. Yet again, another game where you don't want to enter the game because you love listening to the music. But this is the thing. Most of the tracks of the game is very ambient in a good way. Like, it's not like it blasts in your face. It just blends in, you know. Like, the town's music is just, I don't know. It's just appropriate would be the word. It's not like awe-inspiring. It's just appropriate, really. But the battle theme is very addictive. I love the battle theme of The Last Story. And I like how it transitions into the victory screen, which is very bleak, but it's awesome kind of bleak. You know, it's just like, oh, you're done. Prepare for the next hell, kind of way. That's what I got from it, and it's like, okay, it's such an interesting, different kind of music from Nobuo, and for the most part, I liked it. There was a bit parts lacking, but in the end, there was some memorable tracks. You know, Taylor, what did you think?
I really liked the soundtrack. It is different. It is a little bit different. There are some songs of his that are rather reminiscent of some of his older works. There's a particular boss fight that sounds very similar to a certain Final Fantasy VII boss fight that with Those Who Fight Further sounds very similar to it.
Yeah.
The remark about the final boss theme, I would say that it is kind of something in his style. At least it's kind of an, I don't know, I wouldn't say an evolution, but it's along that same branch of how he approached it with Lost Odyssey.
Yeah, it's kind of a transition. The Lost Odyssey was the transition from Final Fantasy into his own style, and then The Last Stories is kind of a spawn off that, going completely way off kilter. But yeah, I'm not saying I hate it. I love it. I liked it.
It's
so
great.
bizarre. It's fucking bizarre. It really is.
Probably my favorite is a different boss theme, and it's almost like a. It almost makes me think of like a Surf's Up kind of thing when the song first starts up.
I know which one you're talking about, and I thought it was completely weird. It really was.
It's weird, but it's so damn fitting. It is so fitting for the setting of it and where the battle takes place. It's just, it works so well for it. I loved it. It was great. So I love the thing that I probably loved even more. You made mention of it on the menu screen. Is that the menu screen? It has the pedals kind of falling and stuff, and it's that white. But then when you hit the A button, it brings up the secondary, like the menu or something, and that image changes as the story progresses. And I love that. And that song there, holy crap, is so awesome. So just. Oh god, I really enjoyed the music for it. So,
if he ever does a Mistwalker concert, that has to be in there. It's just so good. Arrow, what'd you think?
Yeah, I don't really have to add anything. It's really different than what I'm used to from Uematsu, but overall it kind of fits and it works. And yeah, sure, there were some tracks where I was like, why? It's not my preferred style of you know, but overall it works, and you know, I have to be honest. Once again, comparing it to Xenoblade, it's not that awesome as Xenoblade, but it was a very fitting soundtrack, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anyone else have anything else to say?
Oh yeah.
For the fun?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Go for it. Blast it. Blast away, Arrow.
We've been talking about Last Story for pretty much last 45 minutes, and we haven't talked about one thing in particular, and this is probably the thing that if they were to exclude it, we would have had a lot better experience, and that is the multiplayer. I don't know why, but Mistwalker apparently thought it would be a good idea to place a entirely multiplayer combat system for a system that isn't really well known for its online multiplayer. And I have to be honest, and I think I already know the answer, but have you guys played the multiplayer? Because I have not.
Do you know what's funny? I originally was really excited, but at the stage I said to myself, Greg, you're not an online gamer. I actually had people saying, would you want to play with this with me? And I'm like, yeah, no. It makes me seem to be like a heartless bastard, but it's like, I'm not big on online, guys. I've only played online probably 4 times in my life, and 5 times, and I never enjoyed it once. So... But, it's like, hey, I haven't played anyone in the YouTube community, so you guys can prove me wrong if we play together. Maybe at last I could break the curse. But Arrow totally forgot about it. Coming into Tokyo talk about the last story, it's like completely oblivious to it.
Oh yes, it's an entire mode, and being a programmer myself, I don't program games, but I know how hard it must have been for Mistwalker, and how many resources and time they put into this multiplayer component, working out everything with lag and connectivity between users, and all that time and effort I felt could have been spent on the game, which would have easily put the game in at least 1.5 as much content. At least I think so. And hopefully, would have worked out, that kind of lacking character development, and added more side quests and more journey. But I haven't run into anybody who said, I played the multiplayer, I played the hell out of the Last Story's multiplayer because it's so awesome. It's pretty much just the Colosseum side quest that you have, just battling against each other, I believe.
I want to touch on that very quickly. Yo, you go, good sir.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. There's the Colosseum aspect where you're fighting each other, or you're fighting. There's the different settings for it. Some where you have the Colosseum where you're fighting each other, or you're fighting a boss with a group of other people, and you'll actually fight different bosses that appear in the game together with other people randomly online. Or I think you can also find people to play with. I usually just played randomly because it was always fun.
Is the monsters more substantial than in the storyline? Because the Colosseum in the storyline, it doesn't change up that much, or is it just me? Because I know that there's this whole so-called season 1, but it's the same damn battle, and I'm like, when is this going to change? And then it changes, and then that second part sort of blends in with the storyline, which I actually thought was hilarious. But but I don't want to touch upon that. But I don't know. Is it just me, or was it bland in the story? The Colosseum.
Yeah, I used it maybe 2 or 3 times, and I didn't really feel that I was unlocking anything new, so I just never went back to it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it took a lot. I think I might have played that battle about 10 or 20 times before something happened. And it only happens when the story progresses. And I'm like, can I be honest? That was kind of a waste. You had such a great idea and you didn't utilize it, That's one of another little tidbit. The game as a whole is great, but there's just tiny little tidbits that are just slightly annoying, Yeah, I would have to say, final verdicts, gentlemen, on the last story.
Taylor, you can go ahead with this one.
Okay. Honestly, I'm going to be probably the weird one out of the group on this one, but personally, I like this game a little bit more than Xenoblade. I think Xenoblade's a better game, but I got more of I don't know, like a personal kind of connection or enjoyment out of it. I don't know if it was because I seen some of the subtle kind of nods, or at least some of the bits of story that Sakaguchi maybe had used in older Final Fantasy games kind of come out.
There's one that's blatant.
Well, yeah. There's some that are blatant, there's some that are kind of a little bit quieter and stuff, and just I don't know. It just really, it was a game that I really had missed from what Final Fantasy had become with its iterations and stuff as of late, and it really kind of brought it back. Yeah, it doesn't have that expansive journey and whatnot. It's not. I would say the story is definitely not as enjoyable as Lost Odyssey, but I really enjoyed. I personally really enjoyed it. Music was great, and I would definitely suggest this game. As Aaron, you had mentioned earlier, it's not as long, so if you're not looking for a 50-60 hour game, you can plug and play and beat it within 25-30 hours at the most. 30 if you're like crawling throughout the game or something. So, but yeah, I would highly recommend it.
All right. Yeah, it's kind of a hard game for me because it was a very enjoyable experience. It was a good game. It offered a new type of gameplay system that I really enjoyed, but perhaps this was due to the release date, but there were so many other games, and I felt at some point I was just rushing it and really didn't feel that enjoyment anymore later on. And I just went out to, just finish it as soon as possible. And overall, the word that, kind of compiles this game for me is kind of disappointment. Compared to Xenoblade Chronicles, I felt disappointed. And compared to Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, I also felt disappointed. The earlier Mistwalker works. But on its own, it's still an enjoyable game. I know it's coming out in 2 months, early July in North America. And I definitely say to a lot of people, pick this game up because it is quite a unique and good RPG for the Wii. But keep in mind that the game has some issues and you might end up being disappointed. So don't overhype yourself for the last story, but it is still a solid game.
As Zero just said, absolutely. Don't go into this expecting Lost Odyssey 2. It's a game of its own, and it has a lot of things it does right with a little annoyances there. For the most part, the good outweighs the bad, and it is worth buying. It is a good game. If you're still unsure, I would wait, but I cannot anticipate how many copies XT might publish, and if it's going to be one of those rare games, then you just have to jump on it like blackjack. But yeah, I personally enjoyed it. All in all, I enjoyed my time with the last story. It's definitely not Mistwalker's best game, but it's a good game. Okay, and we're back, and now we get to talk about the second game, which is from one of my favorite companies, Mistwalker. And if you haven't already listened to it, we did an entire episode devoted to Mistwalker. I definitely advise you to check it out because it was a great episode. And at the ending of the episode, we were talking about the preview for the last story. Now we get to talk about the game in its entirety and our thoughts and feelings, how it touched us in many ways, hopefully not inappropriately, but anyway, yeah. So one thing I just want to talk about, I've already touched upon this, was the wait for the last story was a big one, because the impact that Lost Odyssey had on me, it made me into a Mistwalker fanboy of sorts. And I remember basically patrolling the internet whenever something, the last story, was mentioned. And I remember being there on Ustream for the 2-hour epic conference that the guys had on the game. And I remember being spellbound and like, oh, this is the number one game I want to play. And I remember when the free Rainfall games was, announced production, the last story was the number one that I was looking forward to the most. And in some ways, it meet my expectations, but in some ways it didn't as well, and I want to talk about that at great length. Now, again, this is one of the games that good sir over here got to play before any of us, and I got to see that at the live stream. And I pretty much said to myself, I only watched the first 8 hours of the game before I call it quits, which ironically is kind of a good quarter of the game. So, but yeah, I'll pass it over to Taylor. What was your thoughts and feelings leading up to the last story's release and that initial playthrough? Because sometimes the game gives you the option of planning a strategy before the battle, where you have to enter a certain point, so you're not alerting the enemies. Yes, I'll be using a lot of sort of terms that kind of harken back to Metal Gear Solid and all that, because there was times I kind of felt like I was playing a medieval Metal Gear Solid game, because stealth also plays a big part in this game, where you can actually put your back to the wall and you'll actually sort of, what's that word? Strafe in the walls or something? Or cover them, whatever. And you can even peer at the wall. It kind of felt like a Metal Gear game in certain parts. But the game awards you if you get the jump on the enemies with, double, triple damage and critical hits, and it's really good. You can plan so much, and that's one thing I really like from the last story. In the game, attacking is automatic. You just simply have to go up to the enemy and the character will attack. However, you do have to press certain buttons to use certain abilities. And I can tell you this now, I had trouble to begin with. And usually, we're talking about how at the beginning of Xenoblade there was a lot of problems with that, but I kind of expected it, and I was like, well, that's due to the controls. With the last story, it's kind of due to the gameplay with the battlefield and changing of the enemies, because one of the skills is the slash ability, where you basically have to go up to a wall and you peer, and when an enemy comes into a certain range, it will have a little slash across the top of its, just above the enemy. And if it's glowing orange and you press the button, Zale will just come out and just slash and do buttloads of damage. However, it was so intricate that the slightest, movement of the enemy might be off it, and if you press the button when it's not there, you basically just walk out with
really hyped up for the last story, so I couldn't wait to get my hands on, and once I finally did, I just had to pop it in and start playing it.
Yeah, I was. There was this one point that I was really unsure if it was coming out. Now, I want to plug this shameless tale of meeting a celebrity, because if you haven't already know, and I know everyone sort of knows, I actually met Nobuo Uematsu, and I got to shake his hand, thank him for the wonderful music, and then popped in saying, I can't wait to play the last story. And he said to me, I don't think the game's coming out. And that kind of was like, oh, we'll make sure we'll get it. He kind of chuckled at that. But I'm hoping that when he heard the news that the game was going to get released worldwide, that put a smile on his face. We'll talk about his music at the later stage, because it's interesting to say the least, I'll say. But yes, give me a brief story of the world of the last stories. You play as a mercenary named Zale. If you're playing a Japanese, his name is Elza, and we'll get into the localization problems later on. But you're with his band of merry mercenaries, and they're on their way to do a job, and shit gets serious. And one thing leads to another, and Zale acquires the power of the gathering. And I won't go too much into how or what it is. You'll have to experience that for yourself. But he has the power to do to gather monsters. And it works in the story, but it also works in battle, where I'll probably touch upon that right now. Is the battle system in the last story is very interesting, because the way to describe it, and I described it in the Mistwalker episode, is it's a strategic action RPG. And you're thinking, how does that work? Well, basically, sometimes that was one of your longest streams, that I ever witnessed.
Yeah, that stream was kind of tiresome, because I was doing double duty of not only playing it, but kind of trying to give you guys a play-by-play of what's going on.
Yeah, we kind of demanded. It's like, what did they say? What did they say?
Yeah, because if you're just watching, you're just like, okay, I have no idea what's going on if you don't understand Japanese. So I'm trying to I'm trying to play the game catch what's being said, look at what you guys are saying in the stream or like the chat box, and then respond to it. And yeah, that was a lot of effort.
We demanded more. We demanded more. This is a good looking game, but yeah, it was when we got the game. When I got the game, it felt like a whole weight was lifted off my shoulders, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. But there is a few problems I want to address. But before we go into it, Era, what was your first feelings? I think we've already discussed this on the Mistwalker episode, but just to remind everyone.
Well, from the point of the Mistwalker episode, you know, leading up to the actual release of the game at the end of February this year, I was hyped up. You know, I finished Xenoblade Chronicles in December, early January, and I was hyped. I was kind of hoping, you know, Mistwalker with their great track record of Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, I was hoping, well, this could potentially, you know, be even better than Xenoblade Chronicles. So I was really hyped up for it, together with, of course, a new Final Fantasy 13-2, and the last story, and also Metal Gear Solid HD. I thought, you know, fantastic franchises that I love so much are getting new sequels, and I was really
Your hand in your pants, waiting for the enemies come and get the drop on you, and I was just like, wow, you know, you just got to be patient with this game, you know, because if you do stuff too quickly, you may pay for it with your life. So one thing I just want to talk about quickly, the battle system, is the spell system. As I mentioned before in the previous episode, it takes a lot to cast, and later on you do get the ability to speed it up. But if an enemy comes over and hits them, it cancels it out, and this was really annoying. But it also added to the challenge, so you had to be on your toes, especially in those battles where just, you know, a horde of enemies would just wash the field, and you would literally have to stand next to the magic user to make sure he or she wouldn't get hit. So yeah, I could definitely say the last story was a very challenging action RPG. And the one thing I will say that it throws you a bone with is if your character learns new skills, it actually gives you a tutorial each time you learn the skills on how to use them. And for the most part it works, but for the vertical blade, I was like, what? Or what is going on? It wasn't until later in the game I finally got the handle on it. You have to press really, really hard at the wall, and your character walks up the wall and jumps down and strikes. And if you can perfect this, it makes the game just, I wouldn't say easier outright, but it just gives you another card to use in your arsenal. So yeah, just quickly I'll go to everyone else. What do you think of the battle system?
all right. Let's see here. Yeah, the last story, it starts off really interesting with its battle system. I have to be honest and say that I was really surprised, you know, by the implementation of, you know, stealth and stuff like that. You know, in the different characters. You know, with the magic users having to spellcast, you got to defend